All right, here we go. It's the System Failure Podcast, number 37.
37, and it is Memorial Day weekend, Brian. We got to make sure we're excited about that. It's the unofficial start date of summer, and boy, howdy, has the weather cooperated. At least in Maine, United States, and in the northeast quadrant of the United States, the weather. I feel like the last several Memorial Days. Now, last Memorial Day I was in Prague, so I missed last year. But going back years before that, my memory is that Memorial Day has just been rotten weather every single Memorial Day like clockwork for like a decade. So I'm really excited to see that it was sunny yesterday, and well, it felt like the summer weather. It's like summer broke just at the right moment, the dramatic moment, just as Memorial Day weekend unfolded before us. And so I'm excited to head into the summer of 2024. I think it's going to be a really good one.
Well, hopefully it doesn't rain every day.
Yeah.
But it's off to a good enough start. I mean, we're up here overlooking Congress Street, and there was some kind of parade marching up and down the street, making a big cacophony yesterday. So
yesterday. So Saturday. Yeah. Today's Sunday, the Sunday of Memorial Day weekend. But didn't you say they were all African American, or it seems odd that only African Americans would be in a Memorial Day parade? So was this a different parade then?
I'm unclear, but it happened last year too. But it's like the Haitian Drum Corps or something.
Haitian Drum Corps.
I'm not exactly sure of the occasion, but they were going up and down the square there.
Yeah, this sounds suspiciously to me like they must have woven some of their cause into the Memorial Day festivities, because I mean there's going to be tomorrow, Monday, the Memorial Day itself, there's going to be like a parade in South Portland, so they'll be doing all the roads will be closed trying to get to the beach. I feel like this must be something different. They must have jumped on or hitched their wagon to the Memorial Day weekend festivities somehow. Because it doesn't quite. You would think you would think it'd be a mixture of all different kinds of faces if it was like people celebrating fallen soldiers from the Empire's many military conflicts. But at any rate, it's always. I mean, I always hate getting stuck in traffic because I forgot the parade was on that day. That's a little Memorial Day tradition for me.
Yeah.
So I look forward to that tomorrow. But it is fun to just have a little bit of ring the bell a little bit to usher in the summer. So I can appreciate that.
Well, now you live by the beach, right?
Yeah,
so we don't have to get stuck trying to go over to Willard there.
Well, but if I forget and head to that side of town, then I'll be screwed, and I forgot again. It used to be my other tradition was to forget that Easter Sunday the grocery stores are always closed, so I haven't done this for a couple years now, but like every Easter, turn up at the grocery store thinking you're going to do some grocery shopping, only to be sorely disappointed. So anyway, it's really great that Memorial Day is here. I am wicked excited. It's nice to, it's such a relief after the long, doldrums of February, March, and April in the state of Maine. It's just so nice to come out on the other side.
Yeah, I don't know how I survive each winter. Somehow we do. But anyway.
Well, I think you had a couple of notes, Brian, on exciting and gripping topics of conversation to regale our listening audience with. So why don't we tackle your list first before we talk later about Ritz von Verk and his recent appearance on the JRE and his defense of simulation theory hypotheses.
Well, I mean, one thing that's going on is I definitely have this YouTube premium addiction, man.
So do you ever scroll other infinite scrolls like on Twitter or Reddit or the Gram? They're all built this way, right? So you get to the bottom of a list of things to click on and it automatically gives you more. That kind of keeps you endlessly scrolling.
Yeah, well, we talked about the Reddit and Twitter, and I think maybe last week, and I've definitely done some doom scrolling on Twitter. And I've definitely cut back. Although it's just hard to cut out. Just the workday, it makes it really hard to cut out the Reddit and Twitter entirely because you're just there at work and you have a minute.
So you're like you're in the grips of an 8-hour workday, and you're just desperate for a few minutes of something engaging versus having to force feed yourself super boring slop at work. You're just desperate if I could just get 15 minutes closer to the end of the day with just a little hit of dopamine. It's just it's hard to resist that, and it's not like you can resist it once and have won the battle. It's a war. It's like you can win the momentary battle of not scrolling Reddit or Twitter, but you can never win the war. I used to make that joke about not buying an Xbox. Right? You can successfully not buy an Xbox, but every time you go to the store, you have to not buy the Xbox. It's a tough conundrum. So you can never quite. You have to be constantly vigilant, as old Mad Eye Moody would say. Constant vigilance is the only way to avoid getting sucked into these. And it's the way that it feeds you. It makes it so easy to do because it's spoon feeding you the next thing. And whereas reading a book, you kind of have to. It's like a ship being towed versus a ship moving under its own power. Like when you read, you have to force yourself through. You have to push your own Winnebago up the hill. Whereas being on some kind of a digital infinite scroll on some kind of a screen is like that Winnebago just rolling down the hill without you having to do anything. And so it just is so much more exciting to ride as the thing rolls down the hill versus having to push it, up the hill.
Well, I think the ultimate poison is going to that new to me on Twitter or whatever the For You feed like before bed is like.
Oh yeah,
that's
yeah,
like some
For
real
You
poison.
Yeah, at least the followers are the ones people you've actually clicked, yes, I want to follow this person.
Well, just inevitably you start getting videos of like horrifying things happening to people, like fights or crazy car crashes and whatnot, and that's the worst. But you see, the YouTube is tricky. I mean, because you want to listen to something to fall asleep at night is the thing, or I don't know. Do you?
No, I see. I've made the habit of keeping my phone out of the room.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes if I'm like, well, I should be going to bed, but maybe I'll just put on, like Bill Burr's comedy podcast or something. I'll have the headphones, but I'll leave the phone in the other room, so I'll just have the headphones only. I can kind of stop it. Or when you have Bluetooth headphones, you put them in your ears, and there's tapping gestures you can do. So one tap will pause and play, and then 2 taps will skip ahead 15 seconds, and 3 taps will skip back 15 seconds. So you can fully control your podcast. I just can't change which pod I'm listening to.
So you don't go to sleep in silence like a madman. You are listening to something.
I usually go to sleep in silence. It's rare that I'll try to put a podcast on at night. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I feel like you have to get into bed, and then I have to go through the day in my mind, and come to emotional closure if there was anything in the day that you had to come to emotional closure over. And I don't know. I just have to digest my day, and really the time to do that is in the 10 or 15 minutes between when you go to bed and when you actually fall asleep. So I try to integrate my day into my personality, or into my concept of myself during those times. Again, generally speaking, I'm not perfect. Sometimes you're just so tired you pass right out without even thinking. But I do have to process everything that happened during the day and fit it all into my understanding of myself, I guess. So that's what I feel like I'm doing before bed most nights, most of the time.
Well, I guess that sounds like well-adjusted behavior. Well, the thing about the YouTube Premium is you gotta have it for listening to Joe Rogan and Crystal and Sagar. I mean, those are definitely the 2 best things that I do on YouTube.
That so Crystal and Sagar's Breaking Points, highly recommended. It's great. I love it when my news is sarcastic of corporations and their profit-seeking ways, or sarcastic of corrupt government bureaucrats. Whereas the rest of the news is, it doesn't. There's a lot of things that they won't say or won't go near, and then there's a lot of fake talking points they pimp to. I always think about NPR and their betrayal in the aftermath of the 2016 election. I started thinking to myself on the ride to work that week, because NPR had rolled out wall-to-wall coverage suggesting that the Donald had been elected president, but was actually a puppet of Putin in Moscow. And I started thinking, what if that's actually true? I never had considered it might actually be true until the election came and went, and NPR, who I trusted at the time, until they started hammering it. I was like, there's no way NPR would be hammering this if it was completely fake. And it turned out to be completely fake. I mean, there was the whole Mueller investigation, and turns out that the Fusion GPS documents that suggested that Donald had ties to Moscow were actually paid for by the Clinton campaign.
Well, the Steele dossier. That Steele dossier came from someone in the British espionage community who was paid to come up with this compromise, and but it was reported as fact, or as if it was if there's smoke, there must be fire here. Surely the good people at NPR would never deceive me for their own political ends. And then of course the other thing is they had the NPR. Some muckety muck at NPR rolled in the past couple of months, explaining why they felt that they needed to not talk about the Hunter Biden laptop story, and why they felt they needed to shield their listeners from hearing about Hunter Biden's laptop on the eve of the 2020 election. And of course, that story was I'll never forget that reading the
editorials that came out in like the Times and the Wall Street Journal with like, it was like 27 former members of the intelligence communities, guys like Clapper. And it said that, we think that the Hunter Biden laptop story has all the marks of Russian disinformation. But then it turns out those editorials signed by these bigwigs in the intelligence community was itself misinformation, and that actually the Hunter Biden laptop story is completely valid. So anyway, that's why I really like Crystal and Sagar, because they don't have Pfizer as their sponsor, and they don't have corporate bigwigs who are going to try to shut down their stories on them. It's just the two of them. And so, they got Ryan and Emily too. Anyway, I just think that's all I use YouTube for. It's the only channel that I follow. So I like to and it's great that they clip their news segments, their newscast into segments, so you can just watch the segments that interest you and skip the ones that aren't so interesting. And so yes, I agree. Premium is like a must-have. For YouTube Premium is a must-have, because, like, if you're going to use YouTube at all, otherwise you'll just be infested with commercials and be utterly unwatchable.
Well, I was going to say, do you remember our pre-YouTube Premium days? Like, before we kind of count for the Ukraine, so you get it for like $1 a month.
Yeah. PSA out there, folks. If you use a VPN and log in to YouTube from a Ukraine IP address, then you can have a Ukrainian YouTube Premium account for $2 a month instead of $27 a month or whatever they charge here stateside. So yeah, everyone get whatever your VPN costs for a month. It's worth it. You don't have to have it for a month. It only takes 5 minutes to sign up. And so yeah, that's the way to handle the YouTube situation, at least for now, Brian?
Well, those mandatory 30-second YouTube commercials, though, are at least an effective road or an effective speed bump to stop you from just like doom scrolling on YouTube, basically.
I see.
And so that is like definitely a thing in the post YouTube Premium era, which I guess we only started doing like in the past 6 months or so.
Yeah.
I think
it was last fall or something when I had bought a VPN for a month. This strategy had worked for me, so I came over here and I was like, Brian, you got to like use this VPN to get yourself a. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're freebasing YouTube now is what we're doing, and it's a kind of a problem. I mean, well, I've been playing Donkey Kong Country 3 because I watched some Donkey Kong Country 3 reviews, and I think it's actually a very underrated Donkey Kong Country game. Is the third one?
This is like a video game from like 1995, right? Isn't that the release year for Donkey Kong Country 3? Maybe 96.
Yeah, it was like the Nintendo 64 was like already out, so it was very much slept on. Yeah. Is the thing about it.
Well, dude, this is a timely reference. This game is only 30 years old.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of the problem with YouTube. And also like Jimmy Dore is on there. See, like Jimmy Dore was just talking about. I think it was when Dave Smith was on Tucker. There was this offhand comment about like whether Russia was paying him to make his show, because I had heard or maybe saw like on NPR or something.
This is Jimmy's show.
Yeah. That Tucker was allegedly being paid by the RTV, or he had gone on RTV, and the story like made the rounds that Tucker now directly paid by Putin.
But that story got thoroughly debunked. Like didn't it like?
Yeah, well, they've issued a bunch of retractions and stuff.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought I saw.
But see, the thing is that I like saw it and. I thought it was true, and I was confused when Dave Smith and Tucker were talking about it. Like I still assumed that it was true, and I wasn't sure what they were saying. And so Jimmy was saying how like Bill Maher is just so spectacularly like uninformed in some ways about like what's really going on. He was bitching about Bill Maher is what it was.
I remember a clip circulated of Maher on his Club Random talking to some chick. I don't know who she was, but she brought up MK Ultra.
Yeah, it was Roseanne Barr.
Was it Roseanne Barr? He didn't know. He pretended he hadn't heard of MK Ultra. Now, for those not in the know, MK Ultra was the CIA mind control program that got the declassification of this program. Was part of the Church and Pike Committee hearings. The Church Committee was the Senate. The Pike Committee was the House, unless I have that backwards. But this is the post-Watergate era of investigative journalism and congressional hearings. And so the MK Ultra program got declassified as a part of that. And it turns out that our intelligence services were so concerned that the Soviets might have been making strides in mind control technology and leaving us in the dust. So they also started experimenting on mind control. And in some cases, the CIA ran non-consensual chemical experiments on U.S. citizens. You can go. This is not like remotely controversial. You can just go to YouTube, go to Wikipedia, type in Operation Midnight Climax, and read about how the CIA dosed Johns. That people who they used prostitutes to dose their Johns with LSD and then observe the effects behind one-way mirrors in hotel rooms in San Francisco in like the late 60s. Really bizarre. So anyway, Bill Maher had like apparently no idea about MK Ultra. It's like, man, if you want to, you have to have some contact with the Howard Zinn sort of the Howard Zinn anti-establishment view of what the American empire is and what we're like. You can't just go. There's like a version of America that's promulgated by our media outlets and in polite society, and then there's a reality that's a lot more shocking and crazy. And even though it sounds strange to say that CIA would like dose unsuspecting American citizens with LSD, that's literally true, and they admit as much. So, yeah, you wonder, is Bill Maher running interference on behalf of his paymasters, or does he genuinely has never heard of MK Ultra? I don't know. Well, it's hard to imagine the latter, eh?
Jimmy Dore was basically accusing Bill Maher of being a shit lib. Like what's that wretched woman?
Rachel Maddow.
Yeah. But I guess I appreciate that Bill Maher's platform. He does have like some kind of discussion, and it's a lot more reasonable than what you hear in a lot of other places. And he does kind of have both sides on to talk about the issues, and it's not as Marxist as maybe I would like. But I guess I mostly appreciate what he does. It's just unbelievable he hasn't heard of MK Ultra, but ultimately, I guess I would not call Bill Maher a shit lib, but he just must not like really read the news, or he must be kind of like Sam Harris, where he's just too invested in the system and has too much money to really like critique it. But on the whole, I'm like down with Bill Maher. But there's some baffling things about him for sure.
Yeah, the MK Ultra thing sure was wild. Well, so I agree. Jimmy Dore also a good one on YouTube. Like, YouTube always just recommends me the Jimmy Dore videos. I don't have to follow him, but I'll just watch him if an interesting Jimmy Dore clip pops up. He's got so many shows. I can't. It's same with Crystalline Saga. I can't watch all of their content. I just have to be selective about what's interesting. But I want to abandon Spotify and go with YouTube, but I would need Rogan we need young Jamie to flag Joe Rogan as a podcast so that it shows up in YouTube Music. I don't want to have two. I could get away with just YouTube and get all my podcasts on YouTube, but I could do it all through YouTube Music if they would just flag the JRE as a podcast, so it would show up on the music side and not only on the video side.
Well, our podcast, has the reach to get our property manager to have us not mention the name of the building that we're in on the podcast, and so that's like our first step. And then maybe somebody will get young Jamie to properly flag the podcast on YouTube Music, and then we'll really know we've made it.
There's a checkbox he's got to check. If you would just check the checkbox. I do like Spotify, and I think that Spotify's decision to give Rogan the exclusive deal in 2020 was a big moment in the coagulation of new media that we're seeing. And so I do have an appreciation for Spotify on that front, and I like that there's audiobooks and podcasts and music in the same app. That's great. I just want to save the $15 a month or whatever the cost to be on Spotify for now. But I really something's got. Someday I'm sure that we'll run ads on this podcast, and it'll be the same as everyone else, where you have to like fast forward for a couple minutes during the middle of the conversation. I don't know. Hopefully there's got to be a better way to do it, but I really do feel fed up with and watching Joe Rogan on YouTube would solve this, at least for the Rogan pod. But the constant interruptions to like shill products, it's like, man, I wish I could just pay a monthly subscription and get rid of that.
Well, it sounds like Sam Harris made he was doing like a donation model, and it sounds like he was making plenty of money, but then he switched to like requiring a subscription. And the subscription's like $30 a month or something crazy, and now he like makes like a boatload of money. And so anyway, I think I would be fine with like the donations accepted model, or if people want to sign up for the Substack or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't think we can do ads for mattresses. And well, if MeUndies wants to reach out to us, I'd consider that. But that's it.
Yeah. I could see ad reads at the beginning and the end. I could see ad reads like what Lex Friedman does, and just put them in the show notes and not have them in the actual audio. But yeah, it is just so jarring to have someone mid-sentence or finish a thought, and then I feel like a lot of these pods are dealing with complex ideas, and it's like you've got a juggling act going on, and then boom, you cut to the ad for MeUndies, and all the juggling balls fall on the floor, and you have to start again. You have to go through the trouble to fast forward, 7 or 8 times, and then you have to pick the juggling balls up one by one and try to get the conversation going again. It's an utter disaster. I do feel like writing's the same way. The only thing with writing is you just can't be. I love writing from the perspective that it's like minimalist in terms of the amount of junk. It doesn't require a lot of equipment. It's a great hobby on that front, but you can't be interrupted because you're trying to hold these complex thoughts in your mind, and then if someone wants to come and ask, with the washer or dryer, it's gonna fall. Then you have to like pick it up. So I have to be like deliberate in my relationship with Tracy about that, and close my door or something to give her a hint that to signal to her that it's not time, that I'm trying to keep all these juggling balls up. It's not time for the. Something has got to be done about the advertising models. Maybe the System Failure Podcast can eventually become a pioneer in advertising or revenue generation in a way that doesn't completely destroy the quality of the product on offer. So that's an issue that'll be a good problem to have when we eventually have to grapple with it down the road, Brian, eh?
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so just speaking of Tucker being a Russian shill, and like Trump's like way ahead in like the polls, it seems, in like all the battleground states except for like I think Michigan. I think Biden's ahead by like 1 point, I think is what it is. And I guess I have 2 questions for you. Well, so there's like the Mueller report. I mean, do you think, I kind of feel like that maybe Trump maybe does actually have like Russian backing anyway, but maybe it's not such a big deal. Or see, it's easy for like Putin to like not be like it seems like people imagine that Putin like wants to like take over the world. Or we have like its crazy caricature of Putin. But I mean, it seems like whatever we're projecting on Putin is like the actual truth about United States foreign policy, with like our crazy misadventures in like the Middle East and now Ukraine and just all kinds of like also overthrowing these banana republics, through the late 1900s, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, like how often the accusations of the establishment are admissions of what there is really, whether it's the Donald with his classified documents, and you're like, oh well, Biden and Hillary have the exact same legal problems with classified documents, or I love this one, the like McCarthyism or the neo-Marxist trope that we have going on now. Like the idea that people who believe in a Marxist conception of history and economics are infiltrating the government, and working from within to destabilize or to take over the empire. Well, I mean, that's a McCarthyite fiction from like there was a round of it in like the 30s, and then like another round of it in the 50s. Red Scares. People were afraid of foreigners, and like the Sacco and Vanzetti trials in Boston South Shore. There's a famous example. People were Italians, Sacco and Vanzetti were, so they got framed for a crime.
Well, it is fun to bring up, the Red Scare and McCarthyism when people are doing all this fear mongering about Russia.
Yeah. Okay, and so that's what they say. But in reality, who is it that's infiltrating the government and take? It's like the business plot of the 1930s, right? It's actually the hardcore capitalist types, the Prescott Bushes, and the DuPont family that owns DuPont Chemical. These are the people that tried to initiate a coup in the late 30s, right here in the United States, to actually replace Roosevelt with a fascist dictator. And so it's like they accuse the communists of doing what they themselves are doing, which is taking over the government from the inside. That's what we talk about when we talk about the deep state, right? You've got the swamp monsters. The thing that they accuse the communists of is the thing they're doing. So anyway, I just thought it's always interesting to notice that accusations are so often admissions, and that maybe this business with the Donald in Russia is something like that, eh?
Well, so if you're like a realpolitik guy instead of like a bright-eyed Marxist like you and I, although I guess I straddle the line sometimes. But I mean, I think, well, just if Russia was the most powerful place in the world, like what would the world, like if Russia like was controlling like the oceans and you know, dominating like if like the ruble was like, you know, the reserve currency of the world, like what would the world be like? And it's kind of easy for us here to critique you know, the United States and our reptilian overlords when we're actually the ones in charge. And it's like easy to say that Putin just wants to protect his borders or whatnot, because he is like the little guy, you know, he's David to our Goliath, right? On the other hand, well, I mean, the Russian Revolution like starts in 1915, right? And you know, we send troops over there to quell the proletariat's uprising, right?
That's
in
right.
a bizarre anti-freedom type of move, although it really became like all too typical, you know, as we proceed into the 20th century.
In the 1985 film, what is that film with about the Soviets invading? It takes place in Colorado, and it had it was Chaz Sheen. Who was it? I can't remember. What the hell? You know the movie where the Soviets invade, right? In the high
Red
school.
Dawn.
Red Dawn. Yes, thank you. Who's the star of Red Dawn? Is it Sheen? Who was like the male lead? Someone famous was in. I can't remember if it was Chaz Sheen or someone else, but it's interesting to note that the invasion of foreign troops, as portrayed in that movie, has only ever played out in reverse, where American troops went to Russia to try to try to reinstall the monarchs and quell the communist revolution. So it's always interesting to note that.
All right, so with that groundwork laid, yeah, I guess my question is, I mean, is there some kind of, does Donald Trump actually have some kind of backing, despite the ability to make any like charges stick from, I mean, like some, maybe like the people keeping Putin in power? I guess I just wouldn't be surprised, right?
We've talked about, you brought it up. You brought up the Jerusalem Times article, but there's many reference. During the COVID era, I used to try to find heterodox opinions on like the vaccine or masks, and you could never find those things on Google. It was hopeless. You'd have to go to DuckDuckGo if you wanted like a contrary opinion on an opinion contrary to the status quo during the darkest days of the COVID pandemic. But the business where Netanyahu is propping up Hamas so that he never has to initiate a two-state solution is, you can just type that into Google. You can just type like Hamas, Netanyahu support, and it just tons of articles come up from Israeli and American news sources. It's not, again, it's completely beyond any sort of controversy. But I bring that up because there's like a layer to, you were asking about realpolitik. There's a layer to the cake of international politics where it's all a performance, or like the Iranians launching the missiles at Israel, having you and me all excited on this podcast a month ago or whenever that was. It's like, that was really a performance. So I don't know. I do wonder how much cooperation is there behind the scenes at the level of international finance. And so, I don't know. I do think that, I don't think that the Donald has, I mean, I'm sure he has like financial ties to Russian banks. I think that's the case, but I don't think that he has, I don't think that there's any more evidence than that. I don't know if there's much evidence of any more of a relationship between Donald and Russia than that. I don't know. What makes you suspect that the Donald might have other connections to Russia? It's been so heavily propagandized that it's really hard to sort out if there's any actual there at all, at least for me.
Yeah, I think it's all like the insane accusations. Or it seems like the case against Donald Trump is falling apart. Although, speaking of YouTube, I was watching like Stephen Colbert, talk about the Donald, and apparently he thinks the Donald's going to prison, and he seems very confident about it. And
any day now, right? The Donald's going to definitely the other shoe's going to drop for the Donald any day. Isn't that what they always say? Hasn't been Colbert beating that drum for years now?
Well, it goes back to like 2016.
Yeah.
And so if the Donald like doesn't go to prison, well, it's the crazy witch hunt gets me to be like suspicious, and I guess that's the biggest thing. Like, why is there such this crazy immune response? And
to the Donald, or specifically to the idea of a connection between the Donald and Russia?
Well, I guess both. Like, if the Donald gets reelected here, and he's ahead in the polls, is he actually going to go in there and replace the FBI?
Of course not. No,
is he going to pardon Snowden and the other guy? Is he? Is it just? It was basically business as usual when the Donald was in charge last time.
No pardon for Assange. No pardon for Snowden. No pardon for, what's her name? Chelsea Manning.
No disclosure.
Oh, isn't Chelsea Manning? No, she did get pardoned, right? Didn't someone pardon her?
I think that's right.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was the Donald or Biden that did, but maybe the internet can reveal that. Okay, so I guess that she was released in 2017, so that would be under the watch of the Donald. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so the Donald, at least he let Chelsea Manning out of jail. But was that really the Donald's doing? I'd have to dig a little deeper. But I generally agree with the music that you mean to convey there, Brian. Obviously, the Donald was in power already for 4 years, and we didn't exactly see wholesale sweeping changes. No nary a swamp was drained, right? It's like I don't really see an election of the Donald as likely to foment much in the way of change at all. That's why I think RFK is a much more exciting candidate, despite the total lack of difference between the Donald and Biden and RFK on foreign policy with respect to Israel.
RFK was just on Tim Pool's show, and they were panning RFK recently, before he was on his show. So hopefully RFK can come through here.
Yeah. Well, it will be at least an interesting re-prosecution of the COVID era. That would be fascinating if the RFK became president. But I think RFK would actually fix some of the regulatory problems, some of the oversight issues, the regulatory capture that is so prevalent among our watchdog, like FDA and
But if
CDC.
you're going to drain the swamp, that seems like how you would actually do it. More than I don't know, arresting Hillary Clinton, or I don't even know.
Right, the Donald was going to lock her up, right? But he never did. That's another example of more of the same from the Donald. Yeah.
So maybe it is just a giant kayfabe, and because obviously they love the divide and conquer strategy. Are the people in charge, and they get to say that every Donald supporter is a loon, and it is beneficial. So maybe it is just a crazy kayfabe all along here, and we're just getting dragged along here.
It's really hard to know. I look forward to an era where new media can reestablish itself, and we can hopefully at least get some kind of fact-finding apparatus about the world to inform the citizenry without being in the pocket of these corporations and other and special interest groups and lobbyists and all of that. It certainly is a problem.
So I guess the more I think about it, the more I lose faith in Donald Trump.
Yeah, I don't think the answer... See, it's great because all the right people hate the Donald, and he outrages the Rachel Maddows and the Hillary Clintons. That's what feels good about that's what I like about the Donald, that they act like he's this existential threat. And that, for example, Sam Harris's pod, if the Donald gets reelected in 2024, Sam Harris's next pod afterwards will be priceless listening. Right? It'll be great. I can't wait to tune in. So there's some emotional satisfaction, but from a policy perspective, I think we got to expect nothing from the Donald. If 2017 to 2020 was any indicator at all.
All right. Well, we're polling for RFK.
Yeah. Well, have you got anything else on your bullet list, Brian? I'm ready to talk about simulation theory on the JRE, but I think you might have had one or two more, eh?
No, I think we can probably skip the Red Lobster.
All right. Okay. Very good. We thought we were going to talk about it last week, but we just had so much to talk about last week that we never did get to it. But I think that for me, I do a lot of talking about Platonism, writing about Platonism, thinking about Platonism, and I had never heard this delayed choice experiment that Rizvan Virk brought up. And we'll get to that in a second, but to properly appreciate the delayed choice experiment that he referenced, I just have to we have to understand the double slit experiment, which we've talked about many times on this podcast. But I think the best way to understand the double slit experiment is to think of the placebo effect and the attendant nocebo effect, which you know very well, Brian, is that people, when you give them medicine, the medicine seems to, just the act of taking medicine at all, even if you've told the person this is a sugar pill, it's got no medicine in it whatsoever, the act of taking a pill, the nocebo effect, is going to cause them to have measurable improvements in their health outcomes, which is really wild. You wouldn't think our conception, our understanding of the universe would make you think that your mind is riding around inside your body, but your body doesn't affect your mind. You know, there's the two realms of existence, right? There's the realm where you're currently located, where you decide to ball your hand up into a fist. And then there's the other realm, which you are observing, in which, lo and behold, your hand actually does make the fist that you're trying to make. And getting in the nature of communication across that membrane, where inside your mind, I want to make a fist, and then outside your head, your hand actually makes the fist, is the subject of much philosophical speculation. And Platonism is the notion that the place where you decide to make the fist is true reality, and the place where the fist is made is nothing but a lower dimensional shadow of that higher dimensional reality.
Right.
Like if you have when you go into a restaurant, you survey the objects in that restaurant, and you have an a priori idea of a chair, right? This thing that in your mind, it's really, it would be hard to write it down, but it's an understanding of that which all chairs have in common that's riding around inside your head. And so when you arrive at a restaurant for the first time, you compare all the objects in that restaurant to this ideal inside your head, and the one that most closely matches the chair ideal is the thing you sit on, right? It's how you know not to sit in the salad bar, you know, or whatever. And so that's what Plato means. He was suggesting, in other words, that reality itself, that the mental realm, the relationship of the mental realm to the 3D or 4D matrix that we live in every day, where we think we exist, is kind of like the relationship that your shadow on the sidewalk has to your three-dimensional person, right? You have this 3D body, but here on the sidewalk is a two-dimensional slice of that 3D, or a two-dimensional shadow of that, a two-dimensional representation of that 3D body. It's warped and distorted because of the angles involved, of course. You know, it might, but.
Right. Well, it's the supremacy of the realm of ideas over the realm of objects.
Well, that's just it. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to drive at here.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that it's my contention that the scientists have figured this out. Right? The scientists have realized that, the objective reality doesn't exist at all in the classical sense, and that they can't tell us regular Joes about it, because the minute you realize that reality is nothing but an illusion, it's nothing but flickering shadows dancing on the wall, it's going to be deleterious to people's decisions whether or not to go to work. You know, it's like, really, if this whole reality is being projected by the communal mental activities of 8 billion people. And if it's really just a shadow puppet show, it's going to make people. That revelation could cause like societal breakdown. And so I think that like the freight truck of science has rumbled through our little village, and a couple of crates fell off of it, and here we are dusting them off on the System Failure podcast. You know, the placebo effect. Well, that's not, if I believing regarding the universe in the classical way, where you're an observer, wandering around inside a large universe. Well, then the placebo effect doesn't make any sense at all, and it's very mysterious. And then you get the double slit experiment, which, of course, is in the 1920s, physicists found out about this double slit experiment, which is super creepy. You basically start with you're firing an electron gun at an electron gun that fires one electron at a time through a plate with a couple of holes in it, and then you have a photosensitive screen beyond that plate, and if you shoot a single photon through a plate with two possible holes that the electron could go through, and then it hits the photosensitive screen beyond it. If you have a device that measures which slit the particle went through, then you would get on the other side of the screen all of the electrons hitting in a pattern that matches the two slits or the two holes in the plate through which the electrons are being fired. But if you do not measure which hole you went through, what you get is an interference pattern on the plate that looks like waves. And so, in other words, it's as though the possible trajectories of the single electron you're now firing through one or two possible holes, it's as if all of the possible trajectories of the electron are bouncing off of each other, and so you end up with this ripple effect. Like if you have a swimming pool full of water, all the water particles bounce off each other and you get this ripply waveform effect, right? So that's why physicists say that light can be measured as a particle or light can be measured as a wave, right? So if you're firing an electron stream through two plates and not measuring which slit they go through, if you're firing an electron gun through a single plate with two slits and not measuring which slit the electrons go through, you get this weird interference pattern, as if the final path of the electron is indeterminate, as of all paths of the electron, the electron is traveling along all possible paths at one time. But then when you measure which slit your electron went through, you put a little sensor over one or both of the slits, well then that wave pattern of possible trajectories collapses into a single trajectory, and now you're getting something that looks a lot more like classical physics or classical mechanics like you'd expect. And so here comes Rizvan Virk, right? He's coming on the JRE, and he's going to convince us all that we live in a simulation. And he starts out with some of the normal logic look how many virtual worlds we are creating. There's just the number of video games alone, we've created all these virtual worlds. And that, therefore, we should expect that the number of actual realities, the ratio of actual realities to virtual realities should be many, many, many to one, right? Many virtual realities for each actual reality. And so, therefore, just by a spin of the wheel alone, just by probability alone, with the overwhelming probability is that we should expect to find ourselves in a simulated universe, versus a real one. And of course, this comes up against the double slit experiment and the placebo effect. And then, of course, this other thing that Rizvan brings up, the delayed choice experiment. Now, this is a fascinating one. Do you remember the delayed choice experiment as the man explained it, Brian? I'm going to obviously do my best to do it justice here, but I wonder if you recall this.
Vaguely.
The idea here is, obviously, with the double slit experiment, you can, depending on how you set up the experiment, you either measure your electron as a wave or you measure it as a particle. And once you've made that selection, like once you've observed your electron going through one slit or the other, you can't go back to the wave pattern, right? It's like the best analogy is an email, right? If I was to type up an email, there are billions of different email addresses I could potentially send my email to. But you could further create a Drake equation for yourself, that equation that talks about, that guesses how many alien worlds there might be just by feeding a bunch of variables into an equation. And then as science progresses, you have a better, like how many planets are there that exist in a Goldilocks zone like Earth's does? How many the factors like that you can plug into this equation and figure out how many alien civilizations might exist in the universe. It's just a thought experiment, but you could do a similar thought experiment with my hypothetical email. Now, you could create a probability function that lists that takes into account every possible email address that I could send it to. And for email addresses that I don't know about or have never heard of, that's going to be a zero probability. You can just factor that right out. But I know you really well, Brian, and we send emails back and forth. Like, there's a good chance that my email would probably go to Brian, or maybe one of our parents or other people for each email address. In other words, there's a hypothetical probability that my email would be sent to that address. But once I've pushed sent and sent the email off to, let's say you, Brian, all of those possibilities collapse into a single reality. And now the probability of us sending my email to our mom, or of me sending an email to our mom, is now zero now that I've clicked send, right? That's how a probabilistic equation collapses into a measurable, observable, classic physics experiment.
Right.
So that's another way of reiterating. Well, light can be measured either as a particle or as a wave, and the wave form is the probabilistic pattern. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle is the thing that underlies this in physics. Werner Heisenberg, the guy from Breaking Bad, that guy. And so the delayed choice experiment is this: if you imagine light from a pulsar or some other heavenly body that gives off a lot of light so we can measure it all the time. And then that light on its way to Earth passes by a black hole or some other massive object that has a gravitational lensing effect and bends the light. You've obviously seen this, that light, the whole point of a black hole, the thing that makes it hard to observe is that it has such strong gravity that even light can't escape from it. And so light is susceptible to gravity, obviously. And this is another one of Einstein's great contributions to science and physics. But if you just imagine that maybe 1 billion light years away there's a quasar, and then somewhere like 1 million light years away in between us and this quasar, the light from that heavenly body has to pass around some massive object that's going to bend the light one way or another. Now, if you're measuring the wave will break around that heavenly object, and you'll see light coming around it from both sides. Right? You'll have some light. It will go, for lack of a better term, to the left of this super dense object that's giving out a gravitational field, and some light will go to the right. Like if you imagine a river flowing around like a supermassive star or something, and the light lenses around it and then reconverges on the other side, refocused. But you can also measure particles of light not as waves but as particles, as electrons that actually have momentum, and actually, if they strike metal objects, will deflect electrons. So these photons, if you measure a photon, the photon can't travel to the left and to the right around the star or supermassive object that's lensing our stream of light from this quasar a billion miles away. And so if you measure it as a particle, you'll get light coming from one side of the star or the other. But if you measure the waveform pattern, you get light coming from both the left and the right, which is fascinating in this regard. The light had to sort of... If the object that's causing the gravitational lensing is a million light years away from us, that means that when you observe it, you're collapsing a wave pattern that's a million years old, right? Retroactively in the past. And that really suggests something about the nature of time. Like the fact that the arrow of cause and effect seems to run backwards in time in this instance is really interesting. It shows that our perception of time and our perception of the other three spatial dimensions are really different ways of perceiving the same thing. And I always like to summarize this idea by suggesting that if I tell you it's 150 miles to Boston, or that it's 2 hours to Boston, these are two ways of relaying identical piece of information. You can measure the distance to Boston with a stopwatch, and you can also measure the distance to Boston with a ruler or a yardstick, or a really long tape measure.
Right.
And so if that's really true, then that means that like your childhood and my childhood and our futures as like old guys, if provided we survive the inevitable communist revolution, of course, that means that that still exists in some sense of the term, right? It's not included in the present, but it's around. It's as if time is like a street corner, and we just can't see around that corner to the past. But the past still exists in the same way that if you're sitting in a concert hall and listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, if you're looking at the sheet music, all that seems to exist is the note that's being played in each given moment. But if you're looking at the sheet music, you can see that the entire symphony has an existence. Even though most of those notes are not the ones being played in the present. So it's like, it's like the rest of the symphony is just hidden around the corner of time where we can't access it, but yet we know it exists. And if that's the case, then you have to start thinking, well, if my youth and my dotage exist in some sense, even though they're not temporarily available in this moment, well, then so do like my ancestors, and so do my future descendants. It really gives a tree-like shape to the human story when you start to envision it with time swapped out for another spatial dimension. In the way that if you look at a decibel chart, you could see the decibel chart of this podcast. You could see a graph with decibel on the y-axis and then time on the x-axis, and that would give a sonic or audio shape that you could visually see. That would be the representation of this podcast, which of course is an audio podcast only.
Right. So the delayed choice experiment, that's what it's called, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, it just it would seem to further indicate like the supremacy of our observational power, like over time itself, which seems improbable. But on the other hand, it's what the science would seem to indicate is what our man was saying, right?
Yeah. This is great for me because like I always keep like the cowboy who keeps the two revolvers in his side holsters. I have the double slit experiment and the placebo effect as my two revolvers. I like to spring on people at a party or whatever. It's a good one to. People can you might be able to poke some holes in the double slit experiment, or you might be able to poke some holes in the placebo effect, but at the end of the day, you really start to have to admit that something's up with reality, and that if reality was the way that we commonly accept it to be, then neither the double slit experiment nor the placebo effect should be possible. So I can't tell you how excited I am to have yet another holster, a third one now, or a third revolver for my holsters that you can add to the rotation of crazy things that the truck of science that have fallen off the truck of science, and that we, the humble villagers, get to dust off and play with and look at. But yeah, I think that I think the scientists have uncovered this fact and cannot go public with it. That the universe, as we understand it, it's an illusion, or like the man said, Rizvan Verk said, that the universe, the more you try to drill down on these particles, the less there appears to be any particles at all, and all you're left with is information. It's like a sequence of ever smaller. What do you call those Matryoshka dolls? The stacking Russian dolls, those Matryoshka,
Babushka,
something like that. I can't remember exactly what you call them, but you know the stacking dolls, and like the more all right, well, an atom is the fundamental unit of existence. Well, we can actually whack the atoms up into protons, neutrons, and electrons, and it turns out that those things, or at least the protons and the protons and neutrons are made of quarks, and and then there's up quarks and down quarks, and you really start to get into the more you just can never drill down enough to get to the base unit of creation. You end up with just data. All right, well, what's the spin on the electron? Is it what's the mass of it? What's its velocity? You can fill out some of this, and then once you figure out some of those variables, it makes other ones impossible to figure out. So there is definitely something very, very strange going on at the core of our existence, and I think the scientists have figured it out, and they now have to be like, they can't be honest anymore about what's going on.
Well, I think when you think about the X and Y axis, and then you have like this Z axis that stands out off the page, right. And then when you think of time as just another axis that we just don't have a good way to add to that three-dimensional graph, it certainly would make sense. Although there's this thing where we still don't have a good way to map, this axis of time. But I mean, the science seems pretty clear on the matter. But I'd have to imagine that if the disclosure, I'm sure the people in charge haven't figured out what's going on. I think we were touching on it before that there's probably like what Eric Weinstein talks about with Epstein getting control of like our collegiate science apparatus and whatnot. Probably has to do with keeping people like off the truth and keeping this crazy game that we're playing going forwards. Yeah, would be my guess.
Yeah. I think that something like that is definitely going on. The implications of this discovery are crazy. And then there's the Roman Empire. It's interesting how the priesthoods and the orthodoxies they kind of by default or have to be designed around keeping people going to work. And that in all times and places, the priesthood is always helping the ruling class to keep the regular Joes to be going to work every day. The creed of Christianity went from being this message about the importance of sacrifice and the illusory nature of the self and ego to the Calvinism and the Protestant work ethic and get back to work sort of ethos. It's amazing how that evolution takes place.
Well, Terrence Howard on Joe Rogan, I think mostly sounds like a madman. And it's like Eric Weinstein is doing the best person talking about this whole thing, like the limits of the orthodoxy in this day and age. But I don't know. On the other hand, I think we got to appreciate people who are out there like really willing to challenge the status quo and really try to fathom like what it all means about this delayed choice experiment and the double slit experiment. Yeah. So God bless those people, however crazy they may sound.
Yeah. Well, I got one more implication here about the time signature, and as you mentioned, the three orthogonal 90-degree angles that the X, Y, and Z axis lie at in relation to each other. And then our monkey brains we couldn't have a pop-up book with more than three of those orthogonal 90-degree angles. We can't grok it. Our limited ape brains cannot picture it. So we've just cheated and added the stopwatch or created a flipbook kind of animation as a way that we experience reality. Because there's just nowhere to hide a fourth 90-degree angle. You can only have three because of our modeling software that we've got installed in our brains. But if you think about your descendants receding in a line behind you over your shoulder when you look, if you conceptualize the time signature as another temporal dimension and just try to ignore the fact that it makes your brain come up with a computational error and just try to imagine it, your ancestors receding over your shoulder into the past and your descendants fanning out before you, it really at a certain point, you have to perceive your individual existence as something as akin to a wave washing up on the shore of the beach, right? The wave itself is the existence of the wave itself is an illusion. What is the real medium is water, and the epistemological status of each individual wave as an individual is just temporary and illusory. And so my point here is that if you reconceptualize the time signature into another spatial dimension, it immediately becomes obvious that the border between you and your descendants and the boundary between you and your ancestors vanishes, and you realize you're just another wave. And the real question is, what is generating the waves? So what I'm saying here is that your status as an individual, your conception of yourself as an ego, is born of the time signature. Like if you think this way, then you can just see that you're another instance of a pattern, and that the pattern is what you actually are, and not the individual instance of it. You are that's really you realize that you are this multi-person pattern, and not an individual person at all. And this really starts to get at some of the divinity and the concept of the afterlife, or an existence beyond our individual self that is that Christianity borrowed from Platonism, and that has become part of our understanding of reality. Sorry, you were going to say?
Yeah, well, you're swimming through the Tesseract now.
Yeah. That's really it. Like, in order to picture a cube in the fourth dimension, we couldn't add another 90-degree angle, so we have to have the cube at 1 o'clock, and the cube at 2 o'clock, and the cube at 3 o'clock. And thinking of the cube at 2 o'clock as a different cube than the cube at 3 o'clock would be like an error, right? You're missing the point. You're misidentifying the cube at 2 o'clock as if it's a discrete thing, but really it's just a cube at 2 o'clock is the same as the cube at 3 o'clock. So anyway, that's my little screed on mortality.
Well, it does explain like what's going on when you're on the mushies, right?
Yes.
It's just a completely mind-blowing experience, and like the different realities are fanning out in front of you.
Yeah.
And it's a thoroughly mind-blowing affair.
Yeah, that's what ego dissolution feels like. There's a relationship between the relentless ticking of time and your conception of yourself as an ego, and then like you take some magic mushrooms, or you drink the kykeon of ancient Greece. You go to Eleusis and drink the kykeon, or you drink the wine of Dionysus, or eat a tab of window pane LSD from Albert Hoffman in the 30s, or pop in the same with the Beatles and Steve Jobs in the 60s, 70s. It's like you have this experience of the death of your ego. And Plato was someone who was initiated into the mysteries of Eleusis. And it's fascinating to me that all of that made its way into Christianity. And we get a weird garbled form about the kingdom of heaven and life after death. But it's fascinating that, the crucifixion's the ultimate story about deprioritizing your ego and individual self for the good of everybody. And that's really where that's what makes humanity so special and so much better, so much, I don't want to say better, but different than other species. We have this sort of like your dog isn't lying awake at night contemplating its mortality and composing, poems of aching beauty, right? The dog's just living its life and isn't worried too much about its eventual demise, and not in the way that we, the tortured ape poets, are. And so it's like our half conception of this tree-shaped adventure of humankind is something that we can appreciate all the better on some of these drugs that dissolve the part of your brain that's generating the ego, the ergot of Eleusis, or the wine and who knows what else of Dionysus, or the magic mushrooms available today that you can find in the woods and eat if you know the right ones. So interesting stuff. The simulation theory the simulation theory hypotheses advanced by Mr. Rids von Verk, it was one of those classic Joe Rogan pods, like the ones like you are the one that got me into the Joe Rogan pod in the late aughts, early on in the game. And these are the kind of pods you tune in for, just mind-blowing ideas. And so I just could not be more delighted to have the delayed choice experiment now locked and ready to spring on unsuspecting individuals at parties or whatever. So, great pod. Did you have any more thoughts on that, Brian? I think we looked through it. I think we looked through it virtually every angle now. Huh?
I think that's pretty much it. the ability to fathom your inevitable demise is quite. That sure is what it means to leave the Garden of Eden, huh?
Yeah, it's a spicy meatball. Yeah, yeah. It's a hard one to digest. Yeah, that's for sure. And yeah, I think you're right. I think that leaving the dogs live their lives and without having to contemplate the horror of their eventual death, or the loss of everything they love. But you're right. Knowledge of that fate is the departure from the Garden of Eden is a great metaphor for that realization.
I guess one musing I would have is that, maybe humans really are special in some way, in that just no other creature seems to have this ability to fathom their death. And maybe humans, we actually are vessels for souls.
Yeah.
And I mean, are there supposing there's all the UFOs in the sky and whatnot. Suppose there's beings out there that are jealous of our ability to be vessels for souls.
Wow, that's an interesting one, man.
And that we have some kind of unique special thing going on there. I don't know. It's pretty egocentric. But see, now you're talking about these archons and whatnot, and going down this crazy conspiracy
Gnosticism.
hole. Yeah, and I don't know. I guess. I mean, I would have to assume that I'm a vessel with a soul, and that we are part of that wave, or we're really we're the ocean, and we're just a wave on the ocean, you talk about. I guess it's probably a good place to be.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt that humans are special in my mind, at least in this regard. I think we're entitled to notice that the universe is this is Terence McKenna's famous idea. I think we're entitled to notice that the universe is a novelty-conserving engine, and that novelty, at one time, the only novelty in the observable universe was basic chemistry that change over billions of years. Within stars, hydrogen atoms are fused to form helium atoms. Right, you get a new element in the periodic table. But organic chemistry is a very slow process that takes place over billions of years. Well, then eventually you get a planet like ours. As that process, you get a whole periodic table, and that process continues for 14 billion years, or whatever the physicists are recently telling us. And then you get Earth with self-replicating cells that reproduce here on Earth, life somehow springs out of the primordial soups here on Earth, tide pools or something like that, and now you have evolutionary novelty, new forms, new species, and this takes place in the time scale of millions of years, not billions. So the evolution of life is much faster. The novelty, change, new things coming into existence from organic chemistry or Darwinian evolution happens over the billion years time scale, a million of year time scale, which is obviously 1,000 times faster than the billions of years time scale. But then eventually you get us, the aforementioned tortured ape poets, as a result of all this evolution. And now you have a new locus of novelty coming into the universe, the human mind. Our epigenetic changes, inventing new languages, new dances, inventing culture, new art pieces. That rate of novelty has sped up. It takes place over the course of thousands of years now, as opposed to millions in the case of biological evolution, or billions in the case of organic chemistry and cosmic creation. And then even in our own time, you and I remember when the iPhone came out and changed everything. In our own time, we can notice that the novelty that comes from within the human mind is speeding up. Technology is speeding up. The things are changing faster and faster, and it seems to be happening on an exponential scale. If you lived in 11th century France, maybe you're a farmer and you live in some point during your life, a new plow handle comes out, a new piece of technology comes out, and it's a huge thing. Things are pretty static for you if you're an 11th century farmer. You'd be lucky to see a new piece of life-changing technology come around in your lifetime. But all this is to say that obviously each level of novelty becomes the platform on which new novelties emerge, and that process is clearly speeding up. And then my final point here is that process is clearly located within the human mind. That if we look at everything we can observe, whether the observable universe or whether the contents of our mindscape, it's obviously humans are the locus of novelty in the universe, at least in this moment.
Yeah. So we're having these ever these singularities are happening at increasing speed,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
order comes out of chaos.
Yeah, it's like the old process. There's still Darwinian evolution still going on, chemistry still going on, new elements being formed in stellar cores still going on. But those are so slow that they're no longer relevant to whatever's unfolding here. So something's up.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just want to finish my musing
Oh,
about
yeah.
our souls here or whatever, because like we're breeding this AI technological life form, but see, I guess the question is like, is the AI technology ever going to have souls? And so, you got like your Chat GPT, like 3.5, and I guess 4.0 is coming. And obviously there was like 3.0 and 2.0 before that. And so you could maybe say that this technology is, existing in some kind of wave. But I guess you have to be agnostic about whether AI will ever somehow have like a soul like we do. And supposing that it doesn't, though, I mean, it really creates like maybe the AI is therefore like super interested in us. And so you're going to have like these AI beings and real beings with souls. And probably the AI beings are like a super powerful force in the universe, right? You'd have to fathom. And if it's true that they never have souls, it creates a crazy sci-fi, tension between these AI beings and the humans. And it probably explains like what's going on with these UFOs and we're in this crazy matrix that we live in, right?
Yeah, I definitely think the UFOs are related to this, and that they've always darkened the skies or lit up the skies, and that there's whatever the divinity religious thing, and then like the sci-fi alien thing, they're going to be connected. I don't quite know how, but I think that it would sure be fascinating if Gnosticism, as you have just elaborated it, like Gnostic ideas are old. There used to be Gnostic Christians living in Alexandria. In fact, there was a whole community of people with all manner of different crazy religious beliefs living in Alexandria prior to the Roman crackdown.
Well, what does that mean to be Gnostic? What did those people believe? Because they probably weren't thinking about AI, right?
Yeah, they believe that the God of the Bible is one of these archons. Is one of these. Is one among is like the God of the Bible is like or is the God of the Bible a demiurge? Is that what it is? Yeah, the God of the Bible, the Yahweh, is like one of these evil characters.
One force among many, though.
Yeah, one among many. But like, in this one, and that there might be many universes, also many realities. But this evil character created this reality. Alexander, and then because like the Gnostics believe that like we people are divine light extruded, trapped in this material world, and that some Gnostics believe that it would be that it's like therefore bad to trap more people in the light, so that some Gnostic sects would refrain from procreative sex, if you can parse that sentence. But then other ones celebrated sex as like some would do like anal sex, anything to avoid making another child and trapping more light. But then some would celebrate sex as the act of creation. That's where the Hieros Gamos ceremonies come from. That copies an old pagan idea. It's where the sex parties from Eyes Wide Shut, or the plot device in the Da Vinci Code. You remember the Sophie Neveu, the heroine of the Da Vinci Code? Her uncle, who was a grand master of the Priory of Sion, she walked in on him at on some sex party and couldn't understand what was happening, and so she was estranged from him. But he's been murdered, and she has to track down his killer. That's the whole point of the book. But Hieros Gamos, the holy wedding, the holy union, or the alchemical wedding, is something that so anyway, it's a fascinating idea that we are like containers for some kind of divine essence. But I don't know. I wonder if we're not. I don't know why we have to be concerned with who has a soul. There's clearly something special about people, but maybe that special thing is just our temporary status as the stewards of the source of novelty in the universe, and that maybe we're handing that baton off to AI as we speak, in the way that biological chemistry took over for basic chemistry, and the way that epigenetic novelty took over for biological evolution. So I don't know. These are both like great theories. I wonder which one is going to turn out to be, or if we'll ever know.
Well, maybe we're going to find out here in the next 20 or 30 years. Seems like a lot is going to happen.
Yeah. With an exponential, with all the processes that governed the introduction of new novelty to the universe speeding up at an exponential scale, one thing we don't have to worry about is having to be patient. So that's good. We don't have to wait too much longer. Something is happening. just interesting to see what that's going to turn out to be.
Well, I think that's ultimately, the point of the System Failure podcast, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I think we've reached the end for today, Brian, but it wouldn't be a System Failure podcast if I did not exhort our listening audience to send us an email with some of your thoughts. What do you think about Brian's half-baked Gnostic theory about us being containers and possibly becoming to be enslaved and farmed like cattle for our status thereof by the upcoming AI overlords? Or
it's really the jealous AIs that I think are a scary idea or interesting.
Vengeful AIs, yeah. Oof, yeah. Send us an email. Let us know what you think. We will if we get an email that's not, as I mentioned, for search engine optimization, we'll certainly read it on the air. And if you want to read some essays that broach this and a great many other fascinating topics, head on over to nop.substack.com, and the email address you can send your comments to is nop@substack.com. Yeah, I think I got that right. All right. Well, this was a great pod, I think, Brian, and we will see all you, the venerable listeners, next week.
Alrighty.